Wow, wow, wow. It's great to see you all here at Studion this evening in late May. And hello to those of you who are following this grand event in a cinema, at Library Plattan, and on the web. Welcome to International Writers' Stage. My name is Ingemar Fast, and I'm head of literature here at Kulturhuset Stadsteatern. And trust me, I ain't stupid. I'm fully aware of the fact that you want me to rapidly disappear from this stage, and I will, within a few seconds, but not until I've expressed my deep gratitude towards the Swedish publishing house Bonnier Carlsen and the translators Ylva Spångberg and Christopher Leandor. And that said, it's time for me to deliver my final words. Dear literature lovers, please welcome from England and accompanied by Johanna Koljonen, the one and only Mr. Neil Gaiman.
For those people watching on the web, you just missed the worst spontaneous standing ovation in history. People bobbed up, they shut down again.
It was a very Scandinavian version of that. I don't think I'll be contributing much tonight, is my general feeling. But I'll be a kind of traffic cop, and I have the privilege of asking some things that are on my mind. But the first thing, of course, that I think we would all like to happen would be a little bit of reading.
Funny you should say that. We were frantically hunting backstage for a copy of the book in English. I thought about that and then thought, no. Really? So, this is a book which in England was called The Ocean at the End of the Lane, but isn't called that in Swedish. Say the Swedish title.
I don't know. Oceanen vid vägens slut. I only just read it backstage, but I didn't write it down, since my worry is remembering the English title tonight. There we are.
So, it's a very peculiar book. It's sort of an accidental book, and we'll probably talk a bit about why it's peculiar and why it's accidental. And I'm going to read a little chunk. At the beginning of the book, our middle-aged narrator has gone home for a funeral. He goes to the end of the road, and he starts to remember things he hasn't thought about for a long time, and events that happened to him when he was 7 years old. It was the first day of the spring holidays. 3 weeks of no school. I woke early, thrilled by the prospect of endless days to fill however I wished. I would read. I would explore. I pulled on my shorts, my t-shirt, my sandals. I went downstairs to the kitchen. My father was cooking while my mother slept in. He was wearing his dressing gown over his pajamas. He often cooked breakfast on Saturdays. I said, "Dad, where's my comic?" He always brought me a copy of Smash before he drove home from work on Fridays, and I would read it on Saturday mornings. In the back of the car, "Do you want toast?" "Yes," I said, "but not burnt." My father did not like toasters. He toasted bread under the grill, and usually he burnt it. I went outside into the drive. I looked around. I went back into the house, pushed the kitchen door, went in. Dad, where's the car? In the drive. No, it isn't. What? The telephone rang, and my father went out into the hall where the phone was to answer it. I heard him talking to someone. The toast began to smoke under the grill. I got up on a chair and turned the grill off. That was the police, my father said. Someone's reported seeing our car abandoned at the bottom of the lane. I said I hadn't even reported it stolen yet. Right, we can head down now, meet them there. Toast! He pulled the pan out from beneath the grill. The toast was smoking and blackened on one side. Is my comic there, or did they steal it? I don't know. The police didn't mention your comic. My father put peanut butter on the burnt side of each piece of toast, replaced his dressing gown with a coat worn over his pajamas, put on a pair of shoes, and we walked down the lane together. He munched his toast as we walked. I held my toast and did not eat it. We'd walked for perhaps 5 minutes down the narrow lane which ran through fields on each side when a police car came up behind us. It slowed, and the driver greeted my father by name. I hid my piece of burnt toast behind my back while my father talked to the policeman. I wished my family would buy normal sliced white bread, the kind that went into toasters, like every other family I knew. My father had found a local baker's shop where they made thick loaves of heavy brown bread, and he insisted on buying them. He said they tasted better, which was, to my mind, nonsense. Proper bread was white and pre-sliced and tasted like almost nothing. That was the point. The driver of the police car got out, opened the passenger door, told me to get in. My father rode up front beside the driver. The police car went slowly down the lane. The whole lane was unpaved back then, just wide enough for one car at a time, a puddly, precipitous, bumpy way with flints sticking up from it, the whole thing rutted by farm equipment and rain and time. Those kids, said the policeman, they think it's funny. Steal a car, drive it around, abandon it. They'll be locals. I'm just glad it was found so fast, said my father. Past Caraway Farm, where a small girl with hair so blonde it was almost white and red cheeks stared at us as we went past. I held my piece of burnt toast on my lap. Funny them leaving it down here, though, said the policeman, because it's a long walk back to anywhere from here. We passed a bend in the lane and saw the white Mini over on the side in front of a gate leading into a field, tires sunk deep in the brown mud. We drove past it, parked on the grass verge. The policeman let me out and the three of us walked over to the Mini. While the policeman told my dad about crime in this area and why it was obviously the local kids had done it, then my dad was opening the passenger side door with his spare key. He said, "Someone left something on the back seat." My father reached back and pulled the blue blanket away that covered the thing in the back seat, even as the policeman was telling him that he shouldn't do that. And I was staring at the back seat because that was where my comic was. So I saw it. It was an it, the thing I was looking at, not a him. Although I was an imaginative child, prone to nightmares, I'd persuaded my parents to take me to Madame Tussauds Waxworks in London when I was 6, because I had wanted to visit the Chamber of Horrors, expecting the movie monster Chambers of Horrors I'd read about in my comics. I'd wanted to thrill to waxworks of Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman. Instead, I was walked through a seemingly endless sequence of dioramas of unremarkable, glum-looking men and women who had murdered people, usually lodgers and members of their own families, and who were then murdered in their turn by hanging by the electric chair in gas chambers. Most of them were depicted with their victims in awkward social situations. seated round a dinner table perhaps as their poisoned family members expired. The plaques that explained who they were also told me that the majority of them had murdered their families and sold the bodies to anatomy. It was then that the word anatomy garnered its own edge of horror for me. I did not know what anatomy was. I knew only that anatomy made people kill their children. The only thing that had kept me from running screaming from the Chamber of Horrors as I was led around it was that none of the waxworks had looked fully convincing. They could not truly look dead, because they did not ever look alive. The thing in the back seat that had been covered by the blue blanket was not convincing either. It looked a little like the opal miner, our lodger, but it was dressed in a black suit with a white ruffled shirt and a black bow tie. Its hair was slicked back and artificially shiny. Its eyes were staring, its lips were bluish, but its skin was very red. It looked like a parody of health. There was no gold chain around its neck. I could see underneath it, crumpled and bent, my copy of Smash, with Batman looking just as he did on the television, on the cover. I don't remember who said what then, just that they made me stand away from the Mini. I crossed the road and I stood there on my own while the policeman talked to my father and wrote things down in a notebook. I stared at the Mini. A length of green garden hose ran from the exhaust pipe up to the driver's window. There was thick brown mud all over the exhaust, holding the hose pipe in place. Nobody was watching me. I took a bite of my toast. It was burnt and cold. At home, my father ate all the most burnt pieces of toast. Yum, he'd say, and charcoal, good for you, and burnt toast, my favourite, and he'd eat it all up. When I was much older, he confessed to me that he had not ever liked burnt toast, had only eaten it to prevent it from going to waste. And for a fraction of a moment, my entire childhood felt like a lie. It was as if one of the pillars of belief that my world had been built upon had crumbled into dry sand. The policeman spoke into a radio in the front of his car. Then he crossed the road and came over to me. "Sorry about this, Sonny," he said. "There's going to be a few more cars coming down this road in a minute. We should find you somewhere to wait that you won't be in the way. Would you like to sit in the back of my car again?" I shook my head. I didn't want to sit there again. Somebody, a girl, said, "He can come back with me to the farmhouse. It's no trouble." She was much older than me, at least 11. Her red-brown hair was worn relatively short for a girl, and her nose was snub. She was freckled. She wore a red skirt. Girls didn't wear jeans much back then, not in those parts. She had a soft Sussex accent and sharp grey-blue eyes. The girl went with the policeman over to my father, and she got permission to take me away, and then I was walking down the lane with her. I said, "There is a dead man in our car." "That's why he came down here," she told me. "The end of the road. Nobody's going to find him and stop him round here, 3 o'clock in the morning. And the mud there is wet and easy to mould." "Do you think he killed himself?" "Yes." "Do you like milk? Gran's milking Bessie now." I said, "Real milk from a cow?" And then felt foolish. But she nodded reassuringly.
Just out of curiosity, how many here have already read The Ocean at the End of the Lane?
About half.
It's a pretty decent number. How many of you have wondered at the dedication at the beginning of the book? To Amanda, who wanted to know. Few people have wondered, and I wonder if it means that everybody else is convinced about what it means. But I'll like to start there. What is that in reference to? What did she want to know?
Well, it's sort of why the book got written in the first place. So I said, as I started to read before, this is an accidental novel. And normally, I don't commit novels by accident. I know that I'm writing a novel. I plan to write a novel. I tell everybody I know. I'm not going to be available for 8 months. I'm writing a novel. And then I write the novel. With this, Amanda was making a record. She was making, my wife, for those of you who don't know, is a musician, a rock musician, and a force of nature. And she had decided to make her album in Melbourne, Australia, because she likes Melbourne and it's hot there. And I said, shall I come with? And she said, no. I'll be making an album, I will not be any company. And I said, fine. I'll go to Florida and I'll write something. And she said, fine. Have fun. So I went off to Florida, and I missed her a lot. And I'd sort of let her know that I missed her, and I'd say, hi, I miss you. And she'd go, that's nice, I'm making an album right now, that's great. So I thought, I'll do a grand romantic gesture. Because grand romantic gestures, people like them. And I thought, what does she like? And I thought, well, she quite likes me. And she likes sort of emotional honesty. And she's, when we wind up lying in bed late at night and talking, a lot of what she always wants to know is who am I? And what was it like being me? And tell her things about my childhood. And I tried once to actually take her to my childhood home. Her childhood home in Lexington, Boston, you can go to. And her parents still live there. And she can show me the places that things happen. And she can still grumble that her mother took down, her Cure posters when she left home. But here's where they used to be. And I can admire the place where her Cure posters used to be. But everywhere that I was doesn't exist anymore. It's all been knocked down. It's all been, houses have been built on those places. They don't exist. So I thought, I know what I will do that will be a grand romantic gesture. It will make her love me, and it will be cooler than flowers. I'm going to write her a short story. And I'll write her a short story that will have an awful lot of emotional me in it. It'll be about a character who, even if the family isn't quite my family, even if the things that happen aren't quite the things that happened, it will be like, this is who I was. When I was 7, if you read this book, you will come away with a much clearer idea of me. So that was my idea. And I sat down and started writing the book, which I didn't think was a book. I thought it was a short story. And I wrote it for a while in Florida. And then I decided I was probably writing a novelette. So I carried on writing my novelette. And then I realized it was too long to be a novelette, so it was obviously going to be a novella. Which made me sad, because there's never anywhere to publish novellas. But I kept writing my novella. And finally I got to the end of it. And by the time I finished it, she'd made her album. She'd come back to America, and she was in Dallas mixing her albums. I flew out to Dallas, actually finished the book, and then started typing it up. And I would, because I wrote it in things like this. In fact, in the incredibly beautiful Swedish edition, on the inside front cover, the inside flaps, front and back, you can actually see my notebook, which is kind of cool. So you can see the book in my handwriting and see just how bad my handwriting is. And I would read it to Amanda. I'd read her what I typed every night. And because she just got back from Australia, she would always fall asleep while I was reading to her, and I never took it personally. Instead, when she woke up in the morning, I'd say, "What was the last thing you remember?" And she'd say, "Oh, Ursula Monckton was, had just told," and I'd say, "Okay," and go back and read the rest of what I'd done that night. And finally, I finished typing up my book, doing my second draft, and I did a word count. And I sent a very, very embarrassed and awkward email to my editors in England and America saying, "I have accidentally written a novel. I know you weren't waiting for it. I'm very sorry, it won't happen again. Here is a book, and I hope you like it." And really had no idea at that point if anybody was going to like it. I knew, from my perspective, I'd written a story for Amanda that had got a bit big. She liked it. That was my entire audience happy. If anybody else liked it, it was a bonus, but I didn't think there was anybody else.
But did you feel when you read as you typed that this was different somehow, that there was a different kind, because this accidental nature can also perhaps make it in some ways honest, and there's a great safety as well in saying, well, this isn't my family, so I can write about me quite openly. Did you notice that it was different once you read it?
I don't know that it was that different from things I've done in short story form, but it was very different from anything I've done in novel form. I could point to things, actually some of the early graphic novels, Violent Cases, is very, very similar in some ways to this. It's about a 3-year-old, Neil, taking a bunch of memories of things that happened to me and a bunch of things that didn't happen to me, that mostly happened to gangsters in Chicago in the 1930s, and sort of mixing them together, which actually just began from learning from my father that the osteopath who had treated me when I was 3, and my father had accidentally broken my arm, and it really was accidental, had been Al Capone's osteopath. And it was just like, that's too good. That's too good to lose. And that was really my first real graphic novel. And Mr. Punch, which was my second big graphic novel that was personal with Dave McKean. Again, a lot of that is sort of true. In fact, more of Mr. Punch is true than isn't true. It's very much a weird, mad assemblage of family legends, and in that one I took Punch and Judy, the English puppets, and sort of put my family and stories about my family and my grandparents and into a setting of Mr. Punch.
I realized as you're saying this that very many of your stories are in some ways about being a parent, sometimes from the child's perspective and sometimes from the parent. Do you think this goes back more to your own childhood or to you being a parent?
Yes. I don't know. I think it has much more to do with me being a human being. Sometimes it's definitely true that being a parent gives you a perspective you wouldn't otherwise have. The Graveyard Book. The Graveyard Book began with me being a 26-year-old father to a 2.5-year-old son who loved his tricycle more than anything. And we lived in a very, very tall, thin house where pretty much every floor was every room was on another floor. And that meant that Mike, my son, couldn't just pedal his tricycle around the house because he'd die. So I would take him downstairs and we'd go across the road to the little graveyard over the road, and he would pedal around there. And I remember looking at him one day and going, you know, he's so happy here. I could do a story about a little kid who goes into a graveyard and it would be like the Jungle Book. Instead of being about a baby who wanders into the jungle and is raised by wild animals and taught the things that wild animals know, he'll be raised by dead people and taught the things that dead people know. And I'll call it the Graveyard Book. What a great idea. And I went upstairs and started writing. And stopped writing, because it wasn't very good. And I thought, it's such a good idea, and I'm not good enough yet as a writer, and I put it off, and I put it off. And eventually one day, in about 2004, I thought, you know, I'm not actually getting any better anymore. I'm about as good as I'm ever going to be, so I may as well write it. And I started writing the Graveyard Book.
Did you have a test for yourself? Was there a point where you again had to read back and say, okay, this is good enough, I'm allowed to continue?
No, I just figured that there was no point in waiting for me to get better, and just started writing it. Actually, what I did was I wrote the first page and a half, and was just heading into my usual despair, the point where I go, this is terrible. And Maddie, my daughter, who at that point was 10 or 11 years old, just sort of wandered by. And she said, what are you writing? I said, well, I'll read it to you. And I read it to her. And she said, that's great, what happens next? And then I wasn't allowed to stop. Now I had to keep going because she wanted to know what happened next. But what I realized when I got to the end of the Graveyard Book was that actually I couldn't have written the end of the Graveyard Book if I hadn't have been a parent. And if I hadn't have been a parent to children who had grown up, who had gone away. Because that was actually something that I had to realize for myself. If you are doing a good job as a parent, if you do your job right, they leave you. If you screw up, if you don't do your job as a parent very well, maybe they'll stay with you for the rest of your life and theirs. And that's really good, because there are these people that you really like and you like spending time with. You love them, you love being with them. But actually, you have to do your job right. You have to do your job to the point where they go, okay, bye. And you go, bye, call me sometime. And they go, yeah, whatever.
And eventually, if all goes well, they'll come back. Mm-hmm. The reverse side of that, though, of these kinds of family constellations that you write about, and I guess that's one of the things that makes especially your work for younger readers so special, is that grown-ups are quite often unreliable or deceitful or mystifying, at least in your books. Is that something? Is that your analysis of grown-ups now, or did you feel that also as a child?
I definitely felt that as a child. It is a terrible thing to be a bright child, because you catch grown-ups out and stuff, and you go, but that's bullshit. And I remember the first point I realized that teachers didn't know what they were talking about. And I was about 10 years old. I was telling somebody this today. They were interviewing me and asking me about comics. And I was saying, so I was at school, and I thought, it's really bugging me. They used to like frown on comics at my school, but they've just actually put out a thing. They've changed the school rules so you are no longer allowed to bring comics into school. And if you do, they will be torn up in front of you. And I thought, I have to talk to one of these teachers. They have to explain this to me. That they are obviously intelligent people. They are my teachers. And I went to the English teacher, who I liked. I was a star in English. And I said, okay, explain the comics thing to me. And he said, well, it's very simple. If you read comics, you're not going to read real literature. And I thought about that, and I said, no, but that's not true. I have the biggest comics collection in the school, and I'm the only person in this school who has read the school library. That's bullshit. I didn't say that's bullshit. I was 11. He was a teacher. But that was definitely that point where I'm going, I get it. This is a stupid, arbitrary rule made up by people who haven't actually thought this through. And I know better than they do. And it was a terrifyingly liberating moment. Going, actually, they're faking it.
You've said in interviews that you decided actively as a child when you were reading children's literature, and you realized that a lot of these authors know nothing about childhood. They just pretend to. That you wouldn't forget what it's like to be a child. Is this true? I mean, you'd say it were, of course, but how did you go about not forgetting?
I think a lot of it actually began with outrage. Okay, so putting me in context, I was a kid with a book. Before any family event, before weddings, bar mitzvahs, birthdays, anything that we had to go to in a car, my dad would pat me down for the book. And he would take any books that he found away and lock them in the car. And it never worked, because wherever I was, I could always find a book somewhere. Sometimes the most unlikely things, and I would just go and sit under a table and read, or behind a couch, or just go somewhere where nobody's going to bother you, and I would read. And that was who I was. And a lot of what I read everything I could get my hands on, but a lot of what I read was children's literature. And if you read enough children's literature as a child, you start going, okay, this stuff, this is real, this is good. There's somebody is being honest with me here, the people feel honest, the people feel real. And then sometimes you'd read books and you go, this is really peculiar. It seems to have been written by somebody who actually has no memory of what it was like to be a child. And that would baffle me, and genuinely baffle me. You know, I'm 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, going, how can you forget? Here I am right now, and I'm reading, and I'm this person, and I'm this thing, and I know who I am. Is there an amnesia gun? Do they get some kind of injection on their 21st birthday? What's the deal? And for me, I guess that was the starting point of just promising myself I wouldn't forget. And it's interesting, you know. Writing this book for me was a very peculiar activity. It was very much like walking back into my head at that age. Things would turn up that would surprise me. By the end of writing the book, the house that I lived in, which was knocked down in 1971, that house was back in my head, brick for brick. Stuff that I hadn't thought of for years, and I knew the books, I knew the wallpaper, I could remember the flakes in the wallpaper, I knew the drawings that I did on the cupboard that we could never get off, the incredibly bad drawing of the Hulk I did, the place in the wall that I used to pick at every time I walked upstairs, until gradually it turned into a giant hole in the wall, and they had to fill it with putty. All of that kind of stuff was back, and it had been gone for a while.
So the house in the breakfast scene, for instance, did you write your house? Did you write your memory?
Yeah, although I would cheat. I cheat all the way through that book, which is why it's fiction. Which pissed off one of my sisters and delighted the other one. One of them got it completely, and she's like, oh, That's so cool. So you swapped the two farms over and you moved them around and you did this and you did that and you did that, you know, and I'm like, yes, I did. And the other one's just like, but it's lies. And I'm going, no, it's fiction. But it didn't happen. I know. That's why it's fiction. People will think it happened. No, they won't. It has giant, flappy, scary things from another dimension. They won't think it happened.
See, now I think a bunch of us, including me, if I'm quite honest, had to consider the possibility at least, given the wording of the dedication, that it did in fact happen. That this is also a book about Amanda asking you where it all comes from, or whether when it started, when these stories started with you, and I was a little bit disappointed to find out in the research that it's in some senses autobiographical. Is it autobiographical in that sense? Are any of these stories that are also in the book? Let's see what we can say without spoiling it for those who haven't read it. Were they with you at the time when you were a child?
Yeah, some of them were, and some of them are true. And it's the analogy that I've used when I tried to explain things like this actually goes all the way back to Violent Cases. When I was telling people what I did on Violent Cases, and they go, "Well, is it true?" And I'd say, "Well, it's like a mosaic picture, you know, where it's lots of little squares of different colors makes the picture, and all the red squares are true." But the red squares aren't the picture. They're just things that I'm putting down. And they're surrounded by lies. And bits of corroborative detail. And things that didn't happen then. And things that didn't happen like that. And things that, if they had happened, wouldn't have happened like that. And then they'll be in a sentence next to something that's absolutely true. Because it was cleaner and easier than the thing that I couldn't make up.
There are bits of it that are quite close to sort of traditional folklore or fairy tale tropes. Did you read? I mean, obviously you've mentioned Batman and the Hulk here, and one could argue that they replaced in our culture some of that storytelling tradition. But did you read fairy tales and those kinds of traditional stories, or even hear them told to you growing up?
I read everything. No, yes, I really did, and I loved fairy tales. I've just done a project that I was in some ways the most fun, and in some ways again was sort of a weird kind of communion with me as a little kid, because I just did a retelling of Hansel and Gretel for a book illustrated by Lorenzo Mattotti, the Italian artist, and I've been a fan of Mattotti's since he did a book called Fires back in about 1986. And for Hansel and Gretel, it was the idea was just do it completely straight, but do it right. And I've retold fairy stories before. I did Snow Glass Apples was a story that was a retelling of Snow White, in which she realized that the Wicked Queen wasn't wicked, she just didn't go far enough. And I did one recently actually called The Sleeper and the Spindle, which is a sort of a mashup of Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, which was really fun. But this one, I thought, right, no, this is not postmodern. This is absolutely, I'm just going to tell you the story of Hansel and Gretel, and I'm going to make you believe it, and I'm going to make you care. And that came out of remembering what it was like to encounter that story for the first time, aged 5 years old, listening to the radio. And on the radio they had the Humperdinck Opera with English lyrics, but they had sort of narration between the songs. So it was a thing for children where you're just hearing the story of Hansel and Gretel. And I'm listening to this thing going, right, what you're telling me is if there's not enough food, my parents will abandon me. Okay, and now they're telling me that nice little old ladies who have cake want to eat me. But you can kill them. And that was wonderful. I mean, that was just like, it was absolutely mind-altering in some ways, that story. So when I was asked if I'd like to write it, and I don't think there's another fairy story I would have said yes to. Just if the mission was just tell it straight. But that one, and also I think I wanted to do it because Bettelheim had irritated me.
We should maybe contextualize a little bit.
Bruno Bettelheim, American. What was he? Was he a psychologist? Was
something
he
like that.
It was something like that.
He wrote a book about the sort of a very famous book that's still in use about the importance and meaning and uses of fairy tales. I take it your theory is different from his.
Yeah. His theory is this story is all about sex. My theory is that any story that begins in a famine with the parents going, we do not have enough food for all four of us, let's abandon the children and we may live, that then turns into a whole thing about a woman who is actually trying to fatten one of the children up to eat, is about food. And I thought he'd missed something big on that, frankly. I'm going, you can say this is about sex all you like. I think this is about food. I think it's about hunger. I think it's a story from a time when there was not enough food. And it's about the choices that you make and that you have to make when you don't have enough food. How do you do? How do you deal? Do you get to the point where you go, we genuinely do not have enough food, there's four of us, either we all die or we abandon the children, who may be okay, we're not killing them, we're just abandoning them. A nice person might meet them and give them food. And in the meantime, we have a chance. But if we keep them, we all die. And you're going, those are cold equations, but they're hungry equations. And so that was where I started. And it was one of the weird things for me was about 10 days ago. I was in a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. And I was talking to some refugees who had just arrived from Syria, from the Golan area that morning. They'd arrived at they crossed the border at about 4 o'clock in the morning. They'd been driven to the camp. There were 5 men, 5 women, and a bunch of little kids. And they were all really thin and really miserable. And they were very pleased to have crossed the border, but really weren't sure what was going on. And I asked if I could talk to them. And they said, sure. And I said to them, what was it that made you become refugees? What happened? And they told me about the shelling. They told me about the various bad things that happened. But then they started talking about the fact that because the farmers could not farm because people would shoot them, because nobody could go out to get food because you might get shot at, so you stayed in your house. Because all of the shops, people smashed the windows and took everything, and the shops were abandoned, so there's no shops and there's no food in them. They ran out of food. There was no food. They ate all the animals they could eat. They went to their sheikhs, to their religious leaders, and they got permission to eat unclean animals. They ate cats, because there were cats around. They killed dogs, and they weren't given permission to eat dogs, but they were given permission to feed the livers of the dogs to their children, which is probably very bad for the children, but they were feeding the livers of the dogs to children. They were out of water, and they went into the swamp. And because nothing came out of any taps, nothing came out of any pumps, but they went into the swamp and they would take muddy water and they would just let it settle, and they would drink the clear, the water from after the mud settled, and they knew that it would probably give them diseases, give them parasites. It was incredibly bad for them. But the choice was, it's that or you die of thirst. So that was what they drank. And it was at that point, when they were running out of things to eat and things to drink, they went, we have to get out of here, our children will die. And the journey that they made, which was a long journey and ended with a 5-day walk across a rocky desert, during the course of which their shoes and their boots fell apart as this sharp obsidian lava just ripped their shoes into bits, and then started ripping their feet, but they kept coming. You go, okay, that's Hansel and Gretel. That's the world that this is in.
And it is, I mean, many of us, of course, find it quite abstract, not having visited these countries, or those stories not being told about the society that in Syria, for instance, before this conflict was not that far from the lives were, the everyday lives of people were quite similar.
It was this.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, no, it was, you know, you're talking to these people and you're saying, what did you do? I had a car showroom. You know, I sold insurance. I had a corner shop. I owned a little shoe factory. I worked in a factory. I sold propane tanks. You know, they were living a, you know, lower middle class, upper middle class life. They were sitting there absolutely in civilization as far as they were concerned. They did not know how thin it was. They did not know that it could break. They didn't think it would break.
I'm happy that you went, because it enables you to tell this story. I'm also curious about why you made the choice to. I think a lot of people who have the resources and the connections to go to refugee camps don't, and the Syrian conflict in particular. There's so much going on in the world right now that it seems, I mean, astonishingly forgotten. How did it come about that you decided this now?
So it all begins about 18 months ago, when I was contacted by BlackBerry. And they said, we're bringing out new BlackBerry phones that are smartphones. Is there something that you would like to do with social media? We would like you to do something for us with social media. And it can be anything you want, and you don't have to sell phones. We just want you to do something. And I went, okay, it sounds really fun. And I said, what if I do a calendar of tales? I go out to Twitter, I ask people on Twitter, I'll throw them questions, one for each month of the year. The January question would be, why is January dangerous? You know, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen in July? What would you like to burn in November? And we'll just see what we get back. And I'll pick one pretty much at random from the things that come in, and I'll write a short story about it. And I'll do 12 short stories. And then we'll give people the stories back and say, okay, here's your stories, now make art. And see if people do paintings or videos or whatever. And it was just a sort of way of going, okay, this is the kind of thing that you can use the web for. You can use it to make art. So I did it. And the advertising agency who had come to me and asked me to do it were shocked, because suddenly, you know, these January questions and February questions and things are trending worldwide on Twitter.
How could they not know?
They were shocked and delighted. And one of them watched this thing happen and went, this is amazing. Neil's readers and the people who follow his Twitter feed are actually really engaged, and they're really smart. It's not just like noise. They understand what's going on. They contribute. And he made the mistake of mentioning this to his sister, who worked for the UN United Nations High Commission on Refugees. And I got a message from her saying, it's World Refugee Day coming up. Would you just tweet a couple of things for us? And I said, sure. So I tweeted the things that they wanted tweeted for World Refugee Day, because I thought it's a good cause. And then they came back to me a month or so later, and they said, you know, it's really strange. We got more people going to our website, more pickups, more donations coming through you. We can track where things come from. And you've been sending us more than anything else, anyone else, even people with a lot more Twitter followers. They're coming from you. Would you like to do some more? And I said, sure. And at this point, they started briefing me. And they're just sort of saying, well, this is what's going on. At that point, I think we were just, the millionth refugee from Syria had just happened. And so suddenly I'm getting people who've been there saying, well, this is what's going on. And I'm going, I didn't know this stuff was going on. And I thought I was relatively well informed. I read newspapers, but actually there's a certain amount of compassion fatigue going on. The Syrian conflict's now been going on for over 2.5 years, and 2.5 million people have left Syria, and it's not news. So they came to me and said, when we would like to send you to a camp. And at that point, I was willing to go to any camp. It wasn't particularly a Syrian thing. It might have been Central Africa. But they said, we'll send you to a camp. When can you do it? And I looked at my schedule, and I said, well, you know, I'm doing this weird little visit to Norway and Sweden and Spain just here. I could do it just before that. And they said, okay. So I went to Jordan, and it was like having my heart ripped out. I hadn't realized. I don't think I'd ever really thought in refugee terms before. I'd thought about it in terms of my family, in terms of the very small number of my family, 3, who survived the Holocaust. You know, that was it. Everybody else died, but 3 sisters survived, and they wound up right at the end in a refugee camp, a displaced persons camp. And so I had a personal connection. But for me, there was a point where I'm out there, and I'm realizing what it takes to make people leave their homes, how bad it had to get, and how bad it had to get to get across the border, because that's not easy. It's not like there's a road you can drive down. There's, you know, there are people who will kill you. I talked to people who went past bodies. You know, the bunch before them was slaughtered, possibly by the same smugglers who were taking them through successfully. They may have decided it was too much trouble, or they couldn't shut them up, or something. Some other people who went past children and adults, the dismembered bodies on the way. So you are going through hell on that journey. And then you watch the resilience. You watch the fact that these people have put a civilization together again for themselves, that you've got a city of 100,000 people in Jordan. It's just a refugee city in the middle of the desert. And how they've created a culture. The best thing was the stuff that they've, what's the best word? Stolen is a bad word. Repurposed. Repurposed is a really good word. They've repurposed the electricity from the street lights. Every single street light is just hung with a spaghetti festoon of wiring where people have climbed up and hacked into it. And they're using it to run shops. There were some people who were actually, they had a pizza place. They were selling pizzas. And they had a bicycle pizza delivery in the camp. And I love the fact that, you know, you can get a pizza.
I think if you Google Neil and Georgina, that is the easiest way to find what's going to happen next, because it seems, I mean, of course this is only a few days ago, but it does seem that like there's some kind of charity initiative happening around this?
What we did, there's a whole bunch of stuff we want to do in terms of storytelling. Just telling people, we picked a few people in the camp and we've interviewed them, we've talked to them. We get their stories and we're just going to do little compressed versions of their stories. And around about World Refugee Day, which is the 20th of June, we'll release some of those to the web.
Do you think it would be possible? I mean, what do you think will happen with you having seen this? And I know it's not the important question at all in the sort of grand scheme of things, but I'm curious about whether you can ever write anything again where this doesn't seep into it somehow, having met these people and seen that resilience, or is it? Do you feel perhaps? I don't know. Did you see something there that you see everywhere, just more, or is this something different?
I think the place for me that art gets made tends not to be in immediacy. I don't go, oh, I'm seeing this thing, it's awful, it hurts, and now I will make art about it, which is what Amanda does. My wife is very, very good at going, I'm seeing this thing, I'm making art. I'm much more into composting. So I'm fine for journalism. I wrote a piece for The Guardian. Whenever anybody says, hey, I read your piece on the Syrian refugees in The Guardian, it made me cry, I go, good. It's what it was meant to do. But now I'm taking all of those experiences and just putting them on the compost heap in the back of my head and hoping they rot down and hoping I can grow some flowers with them. And I hope I can. I think it will be good to write about that stuff. But I don't know, with me, I tend to use Amanda's metaphor, I tend to set my blender settings on high. So it's unlikely, it's not impossible. If I come up with a story, it's perfectly possible. It's unlikely that I would actually set a story in a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. But it's very likely that some of the things that I saw, the people I talked to, the experiences I went through will absolutely wind up in my next stories, because how can I live with them not?
Was there a place for storytelling? I mean, or could you care to reflect a little bit about the role of storytelling? Because of course the meetings, that's what you did as well. You asked people to tell their stories and they sort of framed it as a narrative for you. And do you think that's important? And was there any space in this crisis for sort of imaginative storytelling and playful stories? Did you hear anything like that?
I think there's always a role for imaginative storytelling. And let me tell you something very different that's not actually from the last few days, but was a story that made me reconsider what I do and realize the importance of what I do. Because if you are somebody who makes things up for a living, it's kind of trivial. You go, there's people out there who every day are running rape crisis centers. There are doctors out there. There are ambulance people. There are people out there making a difference in people's lives, and I'm making shit up. And that was very much my attitude for many years. And then a few years ago, I was talking to my cousin Helen. Now, my cousin Helen is 96, and she is Polish and was born in Poland. Been in America now since 1947, I think. And she was in the Warsaw Ghetto. and in the Radomsk ghetto, and she escaped going to the camps only because a woman about 6 or 7 yards behind her in the line where they were lining them up to put them on the train, a pregnant woman collapsed, and the guard with the machine gun turned away to see what had happened, and Helen ran. And she got into a coal bunker, covered herself with coal, and lay there for 24 hours. And in the small hours the next morning, she crept out. But she was telling me that at one point she was in the ghetto, and it was under Nazi control, and no books were allowed. If you had a book, you would be killed. They were looking for an excuse to kill you, and she said there was no trial, they just put a gun to your head and pull the trigger. And she was teaching. It was unofficial teaching. They weren't allowed to teach, but these girls would come to her house and they would sit and they would sew. And while they were sewing, she would teach them things. She'd teach them maths, she'd teach them languages. And she got hold of a copy of Gone with the Wind in Polish translation. And she hid it in the wall behind a loose brick. And every night she would make sure that her windows were covered so no light could be seen, and by candlelight she would read a chapter of Gone with the Wind. Then she'd put it back and hide it. And when the girls came the next day, all they would want to know is what happened in Gone with the Wind. And she would tell them, in her own words, acting it out, tell them the story of what she'd read the night before. And for an hour for her every night, and for an hour for those girls every day, they got to escape the ghetto. They got to go to Tara. They got to go and experience the burning of Atlanta. They got out. They got to escape. And at that point, I thought, here am I going, this thing that I do is trivial. But obviously, this thing that I do is something that people will risk death to experience. And that was the point that I thought, actually, the people who talk about escapism are full of shit. Because it isn't escapism, it's better than that. It's escape. A good book lets you escape. You can go somewhere else. And not only that, while you are there, while you are somewhere else, you are getting knowledge, you're getting armor, you're getting weapons that you can take back with you when you go back to your real world.
Survivism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at that point, I thought, stories, that's how important stories are.
Gone with the Wind, obviously most of us know the film best, but Gone with the Wind was also a massive commercial bestseller. Anything you can think of the Da Vinci Code, that was that kind of a book back then as well. It was a popular novel. I wonder, do you ever worry about literariness? Because coming into writing from comic books, which I think is a noble calling, and having won, you've won awards every year pretty much since you started writing, but many of those have been sort of genre awards. Did it ever worry you that there is this idea of literary writing that is different from the kind of writing you do? And it isn't actually, I don't think, but because of contextually, you're perceived as not being very literary.
Well, the great thing about writing comics is you're not even in the gutter. You're in the drain that the gutter runs into. You are so far down that you don't actually go, oh, I hope I get taken seriously for literature. You just go, writing comics.
But then you go on and write sort of the great American novel a couple of times, and people may not notice as much as they should have. Juries may not notice.
Honestly, I think I'm doing just fine. I don't know. The people who matter to me, I don't get. Well, how do I say this? I tend not to get reviewed as genre fiction anymore, and if I do, I get the kind of reviews that genre fiction people would kill for. I tend to be regarded as a kind of sui generis thing. I mean, I people just sort of go, yeah, it's Neil Gaiman. What kind of book is it? What's a Neil Gaiman book? Neil Gaiman writes Neil Gaiman books. Are they literature? I don't know. They're Neil Gaiman books.
Still, did it ever matter to you?
No. You know, I loved when Sandman 19 won the World Fantasy Award. That was great, because that was the first time, it's happened a lot of times since, but that was the first time that a comic had ever won a literary award. And it was like, okay, yeah, suck on this. And it was even cooler because the next morning they changed the rules so it could never happen again. They were so grumpy that it had happened. And I just... So that time I cared, but I cared because it was comics. It was like showing the world that my medium was as good as anything else. You know, these days, mostly, you know, when I get asked when awards come to me and say, do you want this award? I tend to say no. If anything that I can opt out of, I normally do. If you can't opt out of it, I write a polite acceptance speech, and sometimes I get the award and sometimes I don't, and it doesn't really matter. I've got enough awards. So there does come a point, and it's a faintly embarrassing point, when an award becomes another ugly object you have to find somewhere for. And I'm too polite to ever just put them in a box and put them somewhere dark. They have to be out somewhere, but they have to be out somewhere that nobody can see them. So you have to figure out where you're going to put them, because they are ugly. The only good one was the Ignatz Award. I don't even remember where it came from, but it was a brick named after Ignatz Mouse in Crazy Cat. And I thought, that's great. If I win 20,000 of these, I could build a house.
The other side of this question is, when your big breakthrough as a comic book writer happened, then you belonged to a sort of movement. It was a specific time and a specific wave of writers in comics. But now, as you say, you're writing Neil Gaiman books, but that's, of course, the public perception. I wonder, from your point of view, do you belong to a context or a movement now? Who are the kinds of writers that are your peers?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I have lots of friends who are writers. And I look at what they do. You know, Diana Wynne Jones was somebody who I felt, you know, I didn't feel like she was my peer. I felt like she was always Diana. And it's like, you're so clever. And it broke my heart when she died. And I miss her, you know, to this day. Jonathan Carroll, who's a marvelous writer, lives in Vienna, is somebody who I definitely regard as part of my karass. Michael Chabon, Gene Wolfe, Margaret Atwood, Lemony Snicket, Daniel Handler is definitely somebody. But it's not like we're doing the same things. It's like when we get together, we agree on shit. It's like, yes, this is the way the world should be, and that's why I'm doing this, and that's why you're doing that.
So why is it, though? I mean, because, again, we're sort of circling around this need for the supernatural or the fantastic or the enhanced, or the thing that is more, and the thing that involves some kind of magic, and the sort of soul-lifting journeys that most of these writers offer, and the thing that looks... I mean, there's in many of your books, when you go to magic places, you just kind of turn another way, and in an unexpected direction. And I think a lot of these books do that exact thing. They allow you as the reader to turn in an unexpected direction, and that magic is there, that we know, that we feel somehow should be in our everyday lives, but weirdly isn't. This allows us to go there. What do you think that need is? And is it specific to our time somehow?
I don't think there's anything about storytelling or magic that's specific to our time. And I don't think that, because I think all of the old stories still work as well as they ever did, or most of them. Any story that we have enough cultural context to be able to tell and retell, they work. I think some of your question is more, what is fantasy for?
I guess.
Why write the fantastic? Why move away from absolute mimetic reality? And I think there's a whole bunch of answers to that. One of which is that I've never actually met anybody who lives entirely within absolute mimetic reality as recognized by other people as being absolute mimetic reality. Everybody's reality, we live in our heads. You know, we are these vast things that just go in and in forever. And not only that, but we comprise all of the things that we imagine. We comprise all of the things we've dreamed. We comprise the things that we've believed, and we comprise the things that we used to believe but we've managed no longer to believe in. But maybe on some level we still think that volcanoes explode because they're angry with us, or that there is a man on a white cloud who is just checking to see what we eat.
Or magical thinking of the everyday kind.
There's a little bit of magical thinking in all of us, and if there isn't, then there's still dreams.
Yeah.
And we spend half of our lives, you know, in a place where logic and real existence are more or less irrelevant, and where emotion and imagery are huge, and that's the dream world. But I think all of that stuff is true, and I also think that the much bigger question is, what are you using it for? For me, I will always use magic, if I can, as a way of illuminating a metaphor. You use it in order to say, here is a thing that I'm trying to talk about, and if I talk about it absolutely and directly, you will either turn off or you will miss my point. But if I talk about something else in a way that you're enjoying, I can take you there. And I mean, with Neverwhere, I wanted to write a book about the people who fall through the cracks. I wanted to write a book about the dispossessed, the homeless, the insane, the people in big cities who just fall through. And I thought, if I wrote a book about homeless people, the only people who would read it would be people interested in reading books about homeless people. And actually, they're the last people. I don't care about them because they're already interested. I want to write a book that anybody else would read. And I thought, I will make this a metaphor. I will create London above and London below. And I will tell what happens when you stop existing and you become invisible. And what I loved about that was, after reading Neverwhere, the people who come up to me and say, you know, I used to be really good at making people asleep in shop doorways invisible, making beggars invisible. I was good at not seeing it, and I read that book and I'm not good at that anymore. You take away something that people would have seen, or what? Let's pick a short story. How to Talk to Girls at Parties. It's a short story that I wrote. It's in the Fragile Things collection. And John Cameron Mitchell is meant to be filming it. And it's basically about two schoolboys, aged about 16, who go to a party and they go to the wrong party and they don't realize it, and all of the girls there are aliens. And our narrator is too self-involved to notice. We notice, but as far as he's concerned, girls are this alien species anyway. So while they are telling him this amazing, mind-boggling stuff about what they're doing as tourists on planet Earth, he's missing it completely and just sort of wondering if he leans over, maybe he can put his hand on her shoulder, and missing it completely. And I thought it was a great way of writing a story about how 4 16-year-old boys, girls are kind of alien. They were these people you played with, and now suddenly everything's just changed, and they've got makeup, and where the hell did that come from? And high heels and breasts. How do they know about breasts? What's the deal with breasts? And so I thought, well, I'll write that story. But it will be much more fun to just make them aliens and go that one step further to shine the light back on the thing that you're talking about. And I think that, in many ways, is the joy of fantasy. And I once explained that. I once got a call, I think actually from a Swedish journalist, a long time ago, when Stardust was published. And the journalist called me and he said, look, I loved Neverwhere because it had an important social message. And I've read Stardust, and I've now read it through twice. What's the important social message? And I said, it's an ice cream. Some things just taste nice. It has no social message.
There is something. I have to agree that this is universal, but at the same time, there is something in our age that allows for these kinds of stories to not be niche stories anymore, to be big budget entertainment, and very commercial directors and much less commercial directors can work with your work, for instance. And there's great hope of a TV series.
Honestly, I think some of that stuff is just because special effects have gotten cheaper and cheaper. You know, things that were very hard to do are now very easy to do, which makes, the idea of somebody in like 1964, when it was finished, making the Lord of the Rings film. You know, David Lean making Lord of the Rings, it would have been a really strange film.
So it would have only worked for those of us who grew up wanting this to happen so hard that we were willing to work very, very hard with our suspension of disbelief.
Absolutely. You know, there's... and I think now you don't have to. In fact, now I think it's almost gone too far the other way. It's like anything people can imagine you can see on the screen, and it makes them... They solve the problem. They don't have some of the great problems of storytelling when you couldn't do something. So how do you do it when you can't?
Do you think that's going to create problems for writers? It's what you can do is less exclusive now, you plural, than when those things were only possible on the page.
No. Actually, I don't, because the thing that all writers have that Hollywood doesn't is an unlimited special effects budget and an unlimited casting budget. And we can go as long as we want. Hollywood, I mean, yes, they can do all this stuff, but it's incredibly expensive. And if you're making an incredibly expensive film, you are always going to try and make an incredibly expensive film that everybody likes, because you don't want people not liking it. The great thing about being a writer is you never have to write a book that everybody likes. I don't. I start from the point of view of going, lots of people won't like my book. That's fine. I don't mind. There will be books that they like. That's how I get to make a living, and other writers get to make a living. It would be terrible if people only liked one writer. All the other writers would die.
True.
So I like it that, people like my stuff and they don't like my stuff. That's great. That means we all get to eat. To go back to Hansel and Gretel, I think the eating is great. So But I love, getting to write the ocean at the end of the lane and having, at points in there, a amazing special effects budget. Things are ripping away the stars. And I can do that.
And the existential horror is revealed as well.
Absolutely.
And that's the other thing, of course, that people forget. I mean, I think in a lot of mainstream fantasy film entertainment still, it's a lot about heroes and anti-heroes and villains, and not so much about the existential terror of power, I guess.
And it's also not so much about people, because you don't have time a lot of the time to do people.
I realize, I'm looking at the clock a little bit, we have a little bit more time. I felt a little bit bad. I mean, I love getting to do this, of course, but I think everybody who loves your work also knows how complicated it is, that you have to travel around and do all of these things instead of write, which perhaps you would rather do, and perhaps in some weird way we would rather that you did, except for us, of course. Right.
The thing that I love, though, about coming, about traveling, and I don't do it anywhere near as much as I used to, it's sort of twofold. I love meeting the people, and I love getting an idea of places, because the places, just the knowledge that if I'm setting a story in Sweden, I'm setting it in Sweden rather than an imaginary place based on films that I've seen set in Sweden, there's something incredibly solid and reassuring about that.
Do you make notes if you see something that sort of, this could work somewhere? Do you write it down just on the off chance, or will you remember?
Both. Some things go into notebooks, and there are always notebooks. There's the little reporter's notebook, and then there's the great big writing whatever I'm actually working on notebook. And there's pockets made specially so they fit.
And like 5 pens as well.
So yes,
everybody's brain just exploded. So this means that you know what you're working on right now. Next. You know what the next thing is, and it's right there.
So I'll show everybody. It finishes there.
It said the city. I caught 2 words. I'm sorry. I couldn't. And now you could have had somebody in this chair with photographic memory, and there would have been clues. What can you tell us?
What I'm working on right now is Sandman Overture. That's what it's being written right now, and I'm writing it. J.H. Williams III is drawing it. It's incredibly beautiful. It's also incredibly late. Initially it was late because I went on a book tour and got behind, and now it's late because it actually takes J.H. Williams rather longer. It takes him about 2.5 to 3 months to draw an episode. So when he's finished drawing it, it gets published, and nobody really knows when he's going to finish.
How is writing comics different for you now than the last time around?
Now it's different because you know that the New York Times are looking over your shoulder. We really were in the gutter. When I was writing Sandman, nobody knew, nobody cared. Readers knew, and readers cared. But if I was going to meet a literary professor who was reading Sandman, I could guarantee you that the only reason they were reading Sandman is one of their students had come up to them and started raving about Sandman, and they said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And the kid had gone home, and the next day he'd come in with a dozen Sandmans and handed them over, and then the professor had read them and gone, "These are great." It was bottom up, Sandman, at that point. Nobody felt any obligation to read it. There was no cachet, no kudos, nothing. It was another comic.
Then you changed that. or were part of changing that?
I was definitely part of.
Do you feel bad about that now? Do you regret it at all?
A bit. It was really fun in the gutter. It was fun. It is incredibly fun always doing work when you know that you're part of a bunch of people who are all doing interesting, good, important work, and you know that nobody's watching. And you're sort of going... I remember how I felt the day that Alan Moore handed me 3 black and white Xeroxes, comics, and said, "Here, this is this thing I'm working on. Take a look at this, mate." And I'm picking it up, and there's this guy with these weird blots for faces, and somebody's just been thrown out of a window, and I was saying, "This is really good. What is it? What's it going to be called?" It's the thing I'm working on called Watchmen.
I'm going to cry.
And you're sitting there reading it, and by the end of issue 3, I'm going, I think this changes everything. And I'm just in black and white Xeroxes, and I'm going, everything's just changed. And I'm turning to Alan saying, I think this changes everything. No, it's just a superhero comic, mate. It's all right. And you go, no, you've just rewritten all of the everything, and nothing will ever be the same after this. And who's drawing this? Dave Gibbons. Really? It's amazing. And so that was...
Do you think... I don't know how to phrase this delicately. Do you think you could still be in that? Or is it something that you have to be quite young to be part of? Those kinds of changes?
What a great question. I have absolutely no idea. I think, honestly, I hope you have to be young. I don't know, and I suspect you probably don't, because I can look at, even now I can think about movements that there have been, and you go, okay, here was a big movement, the American science fiction new wave, for example, of the 1960s, and yes, you had some really powerful young writers leading the way. You had Samuel R. Delany, you had Harlan Ellison, you had Roger Zelazny, you had Ursula K. Le Guin, but you also had, people like R.A. Lafferty and William Burroughs, and these guys sort of joining in, who were absolutely, in their 50s, mid-50s at the time. But I do think it is a really good thing for artistic movements that shake things up to be led by the young, because it's a really, really good thing not to know the rules. And by the time you get to my age, you kind of know what the rules are. And so you work within the rules, whatever the rules, or you break the rules, but you know that that's the rule that you're breaking. When you're, a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, 26-year-old, you don't know what the rules are. So you don't break them, you don't follow them, you go completely round and do something else. The idea that you could become a, okay, let's take me. I'm professor in the arts at Bard University. I have a bunch of honorary doctorates. I am... Ocean at the End of the Lane was last year's English Book of the Year. I have awards up the wazoo. I'm taken seriously and treated relatively enviously by other writers, both as a writer of children's fiction, as a writer of adult fiction, as a writer of comics. I'm absolutely considered a name to conjure with, all of that stuff. And I did it by writing comics. If you told somebody that in 1985, when I was going, I think I want to write comics, they would have told you were mad. That would be like somebody in Sweden saying, I want to be a movie star. I am going to go to Antarctica to become a movie star. People in Sweden would say, you don't become a movie star by going to Antarctica. And somebody said, well, I will. You would go, you're mad. And as far as I was concerned, as far as my friends were concerned, I was doing this thing because I wanted to do it. I was doing comics because it seemed to me that there was a whole world that you could go and do that nobody had done. There were all these things. I'd look at the shelves in the bookshop and I'd go, well, yeah, there are novels. Novels are great. I love novels. I read novels. But novels, there's been 3,000 years of novelty things. And they're brilliant. There are some great ones. Comics, it's about 100 years old. And there's jungle out there. There's places, there's terra incognita. There's stuff nobody's been and nobody's done, and I could do some. And that was the exciting thing for me. I wasn't doing it for the money. Dave McKean was getting paid more to do the covers of each Sandman than I was getting paid to write it. And I still loved him. You know, it was not something that you did for the money. It was something you did because you're going, this thing has to exist. And if I don't make it, it won't exist. And that was why I made it, month after month. And at the end of having made it, I got to turn around and go, I'm not quite sure what I'd done. This is the last 10 years of my life, and I've made this thing, and it's big. I know it's big. I know that if you put it all together, it's 2,000 pages. I could hit a burglar with it and stun them, which has always been my definition of great art. Can you stun a burglar with it? Yes, then it's great art. But I didn't think at that point that I'd done this thing, you know, there was any sense to this as a career move or anything. It was just the thing that I wanted to do. And the fact that right now I'm here in this weird position in front of you guys, I look at that and I go, well, it's wonderful, it's humbling. I know how incredibly lucky I am. I know that I get to do what I love, and I get to be paid for what I love. I know that I'm a writer who makes his living by writing, which puts me in the top 2% of writers, because 98% of writers have to have real jobs to fund the writing. And my writing funds all the real jobs. And I get to be a professor for no particular reason that I can figure out. Other than
we're totally running out of time, but now I'm going to have to ask you, but very, very briefly, given that you struggle to find more time to write and not be distracted by things, why would you choose to teach writing, since you clearly don't have to? And also, there is a real risk, since this is a multi-year engagement you have, that many of the people who apply to this class will be massive fans of yours and maybe too starstruck even to hear what you're saying.
We've been a very good filtering system, A. And B, the one thing that I've always discovered whenever I've taught is that people do not let on until the very last day that they've even heard of you before. They will go through the entire sort of month or whatever, go, oh yeah, that's very interesting. And then finally, the last day, they got my Sandman, if you listen. Why did I do it? I did it partly because I figure that I'm, you know, it's the same reason in a weird way that I'm doing the refugee stuff. You have to give back, and I'm really lucky. I've got to where I've got. I know a lot of stuff. I actually know more than I think I do. I always go into these things thinking I'm really stupid. I don't know this stuff. I just do it. And then someone asks a question. You go, oh, I can explain that one. And you just keep doing that. I get to I get to talk to people, I get to exchange ideas, and most importantly, I get to find out what I think. The first course that I did was on writing the fantastic. That was great fun. I got to talk about fantastic literature, the history of the fantastic, and then get these wonderful, smart kids to write. And to write fantasy and to use fantasy as a way of shining a light on other things. We would take stories and I would say, okay, what I want you to do is give me a metaphor and make it real. And the context here is a first date. So you're going to write me a story in which a couple go on a first date and just give me a metaphor. And they would, and things would happen to couples, and they all were writing these really good stories. I was so impressed. But the next one I'm going to do actually won't be writing. The next one I'm doing is a course on adapting Shakespeare. And my only credentials for adapting Shakespeare are that I wrote Sandman 19. But that's not actually why I want to do the course, why I want to teach the course. I want to teach the course because the New York's Public Theatre asked me if I would work with Stephen Merritt on reinventing a version of A Midsummer Night's Dream as a musical to be put on in the New York Theatre in the Park. And I thought, yes, I want to do that. And I love the idea that what we would do to Midsummer Night's Dream would be the equivalent of what West Side Story was to Romeo and Juliet, or The Boys from Syracuse, or Kiss Me Kate. Where it's not taking the thing and adapting it. It's taking the thing and reimagining it in a different way. But I thought, if I'm going to think about this, I may as well find out what I think. And the best way to find out what I think is to answer questions and to try to start explaining it to people and to listen while I'm talking. Because that's how I find out what I think when I go into it. It's all this sort of strange grey blur. And then I find out what my opinions are, what I believe, because I'll be teaching it.
Since these classes are relatively small, I think I'm probably speaking for all of us when I say, once you've figured it out, do you think possibly you could consider writing it down? Because we'd totally buy those books.
I will. But more importantly, with any luck, I will make a musical. And that will be fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Gaiman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Dear Neil Gaiman, you've treated us with an unforgettable, compelling, you name it, emotionally overwhelming evening. And I even think that we have experienced one of the most memorable evenings in the history of International Writers' Stage. And there have been 400 writers since 1998. And may I hand this over to the brilliant Joanna Collinen first?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Listen. And listen, Neil, I'm turning 56 tomorrow, and I want you to promise me that before I completely withdraw into the shadows, and I'm not going to do that next week, I want you to return and continue your conversation with Joanna.
I would love that.
My hand?
Sure, absolutely.
And this is a little ceremony. Do you know what this is about? I have to hand over this coin. There you go. And I hand over this, and you give me back the coin, because I'm giving you a knife.
Oh, you have to buy
And now
knives.
you belong to a very exclusive club. And my God, I love you. Oh. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks. Underbart.